So yeah, it was pretty much like a year of just like digging in and crossing my fingers that this would be something that would let me, pay rent at some point in time.
Welcome to another episode of the Beautiful Work Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Krikorian. Each episode here we feature a special guest from all walks of life and ask them to explore the ins and outs, ups and downs, trials, and triumphs in their chosen field. Writers, musicians, coaches, business owners, artists, and everything in between. We peel back the curtain to hear their stories, to walk their paths, to find out how they breathe life into their beautiful work. I am excited to be back and bringing you another really fantastic interview today on the Beautiful Work Podcast with Andrew Heringer. Andrew is a multi-talented musician, performer, producer, all-around deep thinking, great human being, and excited to share his story. Before we do, couple of quick announcements. On the next podcast, I believe I will have the opportunity to let you guys know the release date for my new album coming out in January. Name of the album is Grandeur, and we will be, I said next week will be that first release date, so I'm really excited to bring you guys that. As far as the podcast goes, so excited about how it's been going this first month, and thank you all so much for following along and for listening. If you guys could, to help continue the podcast's growth, if you could do a couple of things, simple. One is just share it, either on Facebook or wherever you could possibly share it with friends or family and let them know about it. That's really helpful. You could rate it on iTunes. That's super helpful. And maybe if you're so inclined, leave a comment about the podcast. And lastly, if you would like to help support this podcast as well as music and things that I do musically, we have a Patreon page for that. And if you're not familiar with what that is, that's just a completely optional and voluntary way of supporting artists, and you can sign up for anywhere from I think $2 a month to as much as you would want to help just keep things going, to help with costs of the podcast or whatnot. And that Patreon page is www.patreon.com/Dan Krikorian, and you can see all the different ways and levels that you can help. And those that do have access to, show passes and gear, and you can even get a producer credit on one of the podcasts if you are so inclined. That's it for this week of Bugging You. Really excited to bring you Andrew's story. He's a great listen. He has a lot of awesome things to talk about and to say about life and music and creating and play. And wow, it's just a great episode. So without further ado, let's get to the show. Andrew Heringer was born in 1984 in Sacramento, California, and grew up in the nearby town of Placerville. Andrew was a trained musician and performer growing up, and at a young age found himself forming and playing in local bands. In December of 2007, he released his album It Seems So Long Since Yesterday, followed by the 2008 release, The Paradise Sessions. Under California Skies came out in 2010, and while out playing that album, Andrew and I crossed paths in the Northern California town of Redding. While playing together in Redding, Andrew told me he was moving to Los Angeles to start a band he had begun writing with next month. Well, that band, an indie pop folk outlet, became Milo Greene, which released their self-titled debut album in 2012 and went on to tour with the likes of the Civil Wars, the Cold War Kids, and make late-night appearances on David Letterman, Conan O'Brien, Jay Leno, and Carson Daly. In 2015, Andrew decided to take his career in a new direction and left Milo Greene to focus on writing and producing at his Mirror Wall studio in LA, as well as time to collaborate with a variety of new and emerging artists. Andrew is here today to share with us his journey so far in the music industry and much more. All right, I'm joined now by Andrew Heringer. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us on the Beautiful Work podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for reaching out, man.
Absolutely. So my first question to dive into, we're going to talk a ton about music and writing and all your travels and all that you're up to, but is there any interest or hobby or habit that you have that nobody really knows about?
If I were to go that route, I've been doing a lot of like gardening.
Okay. Cool.
Both of my family, my parents both grew up on farms in the Central Valley. So I keep a lot of plants around. And there's something, I got that green thumb, I guess. But yeah, I come from a line of farmers on both sides. So, there is something about like being near nature and kind of being actively participating in, some sort of dialogue with nature that's important to me.
Yeah. That's interesting. I was just recently listening to a podcast with one of my favorite songwriters, Gregory Alan Isaacoff.
Oh yeah. I just read something about, he's got a farm and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Dude, that guy, reading that interview got me going. I was like, oh man, that's my dream life right there. Got a little farm, got my recording studio. Yeah.
Yeah. So he has a recording studio. I think it's in Colorado, like a barn, but then he actually went to horticulture school and, he's like, I guess he does a bunch of stuff and he still gardens and does all that stuff. And he talked a lot about something you just said, where something about being connected to nature and then that being part of his like creative process. Like he mentioned that when he's out in the garden or working outside is when he gets a lot of his ideas for lyrics and music. So interesting you mentioned that.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So good. I didn't know that, but that's cool, that background with the farms. So now my diving question with music a little bit. So you've been a frontman of, your own band back in the day. You've been part of a band. You've been behind the scenes as a mixer and a producer and writer. Is there any role that you sort of prefer over the other within the things you do?
Well, my life at this point has become, I have my own studio here in the Hollywood Hills. A lot, I guess through Milo Greene, I think I found the thing that like the thing that comes most naturally to me, which is kind of the person driving the ship, the person who's, you come up with an idea as a songwriter, and then you've got to get that into a recorded form. And for me, being the person who has my hands on the computer or on the recording software, that to me feels like my natural role at this point. And it's kind of led me to what I've started to build.
And when did you start to feel that role coming on? Like, was it a while ago or was it just more recently?
I've been making records since I was like 15 or 16 years old. Mm-hmm. And I had recording software early on and like was recording friends' bands in high school and my own band. And then for a period there, I started going to studios and cause I figured, they know what they're doing. And they did. And it was a great education. I was always like sitting there watching their every move going, why did they do that? Okay. Oh, and I would start to like, because I never went to school for recording, but it's what I do for my livelihood now. Mm-hmm. And so I've had it within the school of life, like, just sitting there watching people, figuring out what a compressor is and how to, what mics to use and all that kind of stuff. And I think over time, like recording, I think from the outside looks really, kind of looks intimidating, mm-hmm. but I think over time, what I've realized it's as simple as like, okay, here's a microphone and now go. and I think I just try to create a space here where people feel comfortable to grab the microphone and whatever, whether it's singing or playing an instrument or whatever, just feel comfortable to share, and find joy in that, collaboration process.
Yeah. And sorry, the name of your studio again is?
I call it Mirror Wall.
Mirror Wall. Okay. And where does that come from?
There's a huge mirror on the wall in the room where I've got my kind of battle station computer set up. And it's probably supposed to be the bedroom of the house. So I don't know what people in the 70s were in this house and what they were doing with the mirror wall, but now it just acts as the namesake for the house. Okay, cool. So on that same line now, kind of venturing into what you're doing with your studio and engineering, are there any engineers or producers out there that you've always maybe patterned your sounds off of or your style? Man, there's definitely, there's so many bands. I tend to get really inspired by bands. Because I kind of grew up in that route and, in the Milo Greene years, I was always looking at just specific bands. To me, I think in the last like 5-10 years, like I just saw Arcade Fire the other night at the Greek Theater in Berkeley. Okay. I saw them 2 nights in a row up there, and like to me they're one of the bands in the last 10 years that I've like studied. Like I just think they just know what they're doing. To me, like someone like Justin Vernon and the Bon Iver Project, I definitely have like a left, like indie pop, but slightly left into the like folk Americana world that like I think kind of is my natural tendencies. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and then kind of diving into your initial question, there's a couple producer. I tend to, like, I consider myself a writer. Like when someone comes to the studio here, we're usually writing the song together, recording the song together, producing the song together, mixing the song together, and then we put it out. So I like the people who inspire me are like the Greg Kirstens of the world. I don't know if you know Greg at all. I do not. Man, he's been attached to everybody, like Sia, Katy Perry, Adele. Recently, he just did the new Paul McCartney record and worked with Foo Fighters. But the thing that's really, really inspiring about his journey to me is I read this article, I think it was in the last 2 or 3 years, and it said, Greg Kirsten, the, 15-year overnight success story. And like, if you look at his discography, you'll see, early 2000s, you'll see he's writing with all these people and you may not recognize any of the names. And then slowly you see, okay, there's Sia and, and then like all of a sudden, there's Katy Perry and all of a sudden there's just this swing to his career where all of a sudden, he's working with the Adeles of the world and the Paul McCartneys of the world. And, and I think it's that kind of, and it's that kind of like that to me is really inspiring. Cause it's just kind of how I live my life. I create with people and for me, there's an excitement, in watching someone do that journey. And for me, there's an excitement in like, I feel like, the artists that, about 2 years ago, I left Milo Greene. Actually, it's about 3 years ago now. That's crazy. So the end of 2015, I left Milo Greene. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I knew that band, I did not find joy in that band anymore. But I knew music was my thing. So, just kind of made this leap of faith and I've started, a lot of it early on was just reaching out to people and like, hey, let's make something. And over the last couple of years, people have started coming to me to make records. And that to me, is a lot of fun. I feel like I'm in, instead of being in one band, I'm in, 25 bands or something.
Sure.
It's exciting.
Well, you mentioned a lot of terrific people there in that segment. And I want to go back to, you mentioned in the beginning, Arcade Fire and those guys you went up to watch. Yeah. What is it, I guess specifically when you go see a show and they're playing, like, what is it that really you say, wow, they're so fantastic of a band and the sound?
They get they get it. I mean, the whole show itself is incredible, but like, if you just look at their music alone, they have the it factor that is that like that point where, simplicity and complexity cross in my book. It's like, if you watch them live, like, a lot of times the guitar player is just playing, steady eighth notes and the drummer's just going boom, ka, boom, ka, boom, ka, boom, ka. But it's the, like, all these pieces together. And then you find melodically, they understand, how to hook you. Sure. Arrangement wise, they know how to make a song feel like a journey. And yeah, to me, it's just really, it's pop music at its finest to me, like rock and roll pop music at its finest in the current era. Yeah,
I'd agree with you. They're, they've been one of the bands I've listened to pretty closely over the last, it's getting on 10 years, I guess now. It's really good. And I guess sort of dovetailing that question with you being so involved in all the different elements of making music, from the writing to the producing, mixing, all that. When you go to a show, are you able to like relax and enjoy it? Or is your brain just going nuts and just like, what's that like for you?
My girlfriend was asking me that this weekend. And I can go back and forth. I can be a fan. I can just sit there.
Okay.
And sing along and sing the lyrics and just kind of get lost in that moment. And, but at the same time, then my brain starts going, oh man, that drummer is just, doing this pattern. And then, oh man, that keyboard's doing this. And oh, I see how that interlocks with the violin. And yeah, then my brain starts to go there. Yeah. But I try to like balance it out.
Yeah. I always like to ask guys that I know that are in the industry, cause being a songwriter and doing all this stuff myself, my wife and I will go to a concert and, I'll be like thoroughly enjoying it, but I'm like locked in on all the stuff you just talked about. And I'm listening to like this and that. But I think on my face, I don't look like I'm like the average person, like just jumping up and down and I'm sort of like, I've got this look on my face and I'm like, yeah, I really am enjoying it. It's a different experience.
Because there's a part of your brain that's studying.
Yes.
It's like, yeah. It's part of the,
like
it's like school.
Right. Yeah. It's homework with a beer.
Yeah.
Well, let's, you mentioned a little bit, and for those of you, for those that are listening that aren't familiar with who Milo Greene is, could you maybe talk a little bit about that band and then, kind of how that maybe started and where it is?
It was a really interesting journey, man. We were all in separate bands. I was living up in Sacramento, working with this woman named Marlena Sheets. And we actually had a duo called Dawson and Marie back in the day, and played up in, the Reading Wine Bar and all that, where we crossed paths originally.
Yes.
And then I had some friends from college who were living down here in LA and in another band, and Robbie Arnett specifically, who was the singer in that band. He and I and Marlena started collaborating, and we would go do these. It was just for fun. It was just a kind of outlet from a break from the other band projects we were doing. And we'd go up to friends' houses. We'd go to, like my grandpa's cabin up in the Sierras. And we, like, over time, we started to realize that these songs were just, there was that it factor to them that we hadn't found with our other projects. So I think after probably a good, 6-8 months of working on that project, I decided to fold my band and move to LA and do Milo Greene. And for about 2 years, about a year, I don't know, a year and a half or so. I just sat at home and worked on that record. Luckily I had lived in Sacramento, and I'd saved up enough money, because I was paying like $250 to live in like a converted like dining room or something. And so I got to move to LA with enough in my back pocket to where I was like, I can just coast for a while and just dive in head first to this record. And it paid off in that, the record, we got a record deal. We got a tour opening for a band called the Civil Wars. And like that kind of all happened around the same time, like mid 2012 or end of 2011. So yeah, it was pretty much like a year of just like digging in and crossing my fingers that this would be something that would let me, pay rent at some point in time.
If we could, for those, that are interested in how this works, but how do you go from, producing the record to all of a sudden, opening for the Civil Wars, which is one of the great, duo bands of all time? How did that happen? What were the steps like?
Yeah. I like I said, a couple of the other band members had been in bands in LA, and that was pretty huge for Marlena and I moving down from Sacramento, because they had some connections in the industry. Namely, we had a manager named JJ, and who was on board with Milo Greene from the beginning, and he was young and he was hungry, and he really put us out there, and like he was tapped into a community of managers, music managers. And so what ended up happening was we launched the band. I think we put like a couple singles online and a performance video. And then I think about 2 months later, we got the call to open for the Civil Wars. And that was just because our manager had known another manager. It was actually initially the tour was offered to a band called Dawes.
Yep.
And Dawes was going to go on their own tour, but the manager said, well, here's a couple other bands I really like. And we just happen to be one of those bands, So, there is so much to be said for your community and,
Sure.
The people who are willing to put your name out there in those moments. And that was just one of those moments. Like you just don't like it's, yeah, you just can't bet on those moments happening. But it was right when they were, playing 3,000 seat theaters all around the country. So our first tour as a band was playing these big, beautiful theaters all across North America,
Wow. That must have been, must have been quite an experience.
I was like, don't get used to this, guys. This is not real life. This is not real life.
How, you guys are playing with them every night. How was it to, work with the Civil Wars on a nightly basis, or did you have much interaction with them on the road?
Yeah, as much as you do when you're, a young band in a van following a bus around. Like, I think one of the things people don't understand is like, like the headlining band, they're in a bus. They play a show, they get on the bus, and the next morning they wake up in the next city. But the opening band, you played the show, went to a hotel room, and then the next day you got to drive 6 hours to that next city, and so you're kind of like constantly playing catch up. So, as much time as you have at the venue,
okay.
And there'll be off days where we'd hang out every now and then. But yeah, it was there. They had a professionalism that was really inspiring. They're one of those acts, like they pretty much like put on the same show every night, like the same banter. Like it was a script, like, okay. and I'm not, and I don't say that. I actually think there's something really consistent about that. Like that's just, they knew that they were the kind of performers that would work best. But it was really inspiring for us, because we just saw, okay, like, just making sure we knew, okay, this person talks then and this person talks then. And, just gave us, it gave us a really good view into how to take our show to the next level,
That's great. And your story about kind of catching up to them every night, you guys being in the van. So one of the other guests that's been on this podcast, his name is Bob Bolding, and Bob Bolding for 17 years was the lead guitarist in the band, the Young Dubliners, the Celtic rock band. And they opened, in the early 2000s, they were opening for Jethro Tull. And
nice.
He was talking about at that point, they're playing in front of 5, 6, 7, 8,000 people, maybe more every night. But two things, he mentioned the same thing about how, Jethro Tull was in this beautiful, nice bus and they were in the van behind him, doing the same thing.
Uh-huh.
And then he also talked about how professional they were as musicians and how they were just so good at their craft. And that for him being kind of a younger guitarist, he talked about what you said, they're just so professional and so good that he kind of took that with him in his career.
Yeah. Yeah.
So with Milo Greene, you guys opened for the Civil Wars, and then, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys were on Conan twice, Leno and Letterman. What was that experience like?
The first one was pretty surreal. We were on a headlining tour. It was like July of 2012. Our record had just come out. We were on a tour, first headline. I think we were playing Lollapalooza. Like, there was real momentum. And we played the first one we did was Letterman, but we were in, DC the night before, playing DC the night before Letterman. So we had to drive through the night in order to load in at like 4 a.m. or something like that in New York City. And you walk into that studio, and for some reason Letterman kept it at like 39 degrees. And that was like specific. It was like, but it maybe not 39, but it was like 42 degrees, or it was cold. Sure. It was like see your breath, and you like at some point somebody asked one of the crew guys, like, what's the deal? Why is it so cold in here? And he just, without missing a beat, just goes, it keeps the comedy fresh, and just walks away. And so you're like, all right, whatever. So we were all tired as hell. And here we are, like that's the Ed Sullivan, like, theater. It's where the Beatles, had their first like TV thing. And my dad had flown out, and it was, I think it was one of the first times I'd really seen him get emotional about, kind of my, cause I think, when your kid says, I'm going to be a professional musician, I can't imagine that's every parent's, especially if you don't have an idea of what that career looks like. I can imagine there's a bit of, okay, have fun doing that, type of thing from a parent. Yeah. But, my dad kind of being able to be there and see that, that was a special moment. That was a really special moment. But yeah, all of this, we got so many opportunities with Milo Greene, from the late night shows to, we played Lollapalooza and Bonnaroo and Outside Lands, and doing major festivals we were on the same stages as, some of my idols and some artists I really look up to, so lived that life and We went to Europe a couple times, opened for Cold War kids over there,
Wow.
opened for like First Aid Kit over there. We did, our first two shows in London were like two sold out nights in this church. It's just like the project had this momentum that, I'd been trying for years and it just clicked, and, so it was a beautiful thing to have like seen it, the three of us, we did the whole thing on that record on my laptop. And I think it gave me the confidence to say, okay, I know what I'm doing now.
Sure.
And it was exciting to have that, that encouragement from the world.
So of all those places you played and traveled and bands you opened for, do you still have relationships with some of those bands or any of those people?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that period of time allowed me to do what I'm doing now. Like I've got to meet a lot of bands, and songwriters and like there was one particular tour Milo had a band open for us called Kopecky. That band was fronted by a guy named Gabe Simon. And, just that whole band, was like kind of became road family. But Gabe became somebody who we ended up doing a record together. And, we have that, a couple songs of that project out under the moniker, The Proper Gentleman.
Okay.
And we're actually still sitting on that record, but we got a couple songs out right now. But he became somebody who, like, he was out in Nashville and he was like, hey, come out and write with me here in Nashville. And so I would just go out, and me and him and this producer named Conrad Snyder, who would, we are the Proper Gentleman, the crew of Proper Gentlemen. And it was kind of this time where we were all kind of transitioning from, like, Gabe and I were transitioning from being in bands to being songwriters for a living and figuring out how to, like, do that. And I think some of those sessions together, were kind of my first dipping my toe in to, they would bring in a lot of Nashville people to do some co-writes with us. And so, yeah, it was just kind of getting into that flow. And like from there's an artist named Morgan who, it's Morgxn.
Okay.
One time I was out in Nashville and, Gabe was like, hey, come along to this write. And we went, and it was this artist Morgan. And then the song we wrote that day ended up being something he cut. And it's kind of one of those things where, like I said earlier, like, having a community of people who will vouch for you and say, oh yeah, you got to go work with this guy. Right. Like, it's so important for the doors to just keep opening, and then you meet this artist and then another artist. And, it just kind of snowballs like that,
And do you feel like the Milo Greene project and where you guys went, what you did, that sort of opened all these doors for you that now you can just continue to open yourself?
Yeah, it definitely started some momentum. Milo Greene wasn't a household name, but it got us enough, enough notoriety, especially people, in the industry.
Right.
For me to kind of, I ended up, spending a couple years in a publishing deal and doing a lot of, music for TV shows. And that was actually a big part of Milo Greene too. It was this like kind of perfect storm moment where it was like 2012 where you had like in the previous years, Mumford and Sons and Fleet Foxes and music that was kind of in that like acoustic throwback, genre was, Head in the Hearts, so it was one of these times where, from a TV standpoint, our songs were the kind of like it thing, or that genre was the it thing. So we got like maybe 15 different TV placements for that record. And I really started to see how you can make a living as a songwriter, especially from the TV placements. That's kind of the like some of the golden opportunities in the songwriting world right now. Getting your songs in a commercial and a TV trailer or movie trailer. TV show. That's where, the film world has a lot of money to throw at things.
Absolutely. Okay. So then, and I guess to sort of, close the book on the Milo Greene part, what was the decision like, and what were maybe some of the things that went into you deciding to step away and then go on this new path that you're on now?
Well, we made the first record, and that was something we, had for the most part done ourselves. We had brought in some other people to help, but, and spent some time in a studio and, to help with that. But, I think that with that first record, there's just a lot of camaraderie with it. And there was a lot of us like sharing influences and just being excited to be making music together. And after touring, after being around each other, it's like cabin fever in a way, where we were so devoted to the project that it got, and we were kind of in that like late 20s space where, maybe I hadn't really looked at my own like emotional, strength or balance as well as I could have yet. And I think we were all kind of there together, kind of dealing like figuring out how to be friends with these people, be business partners with these people, be like literally like family on top of each other, traveling around together all the time. And we didn't have the right, foundation for all of that, from an emotional intelligence or communication or leadership. Those aspects were lacking. And so over time, we didn't enjoy writing songs together anymore. And it was difficult. It was just difficult. It wasn't as playful as it had once been. And so I think the straw for me that really broke it, like we made the second record. The second record was something I've been pretty vocal about. My heart was not in that album. It was kind of done in a process where it was a bit more individual. People were kind of, taking things and kind of working on things more. And whereas the first record had been really collaborative. We put this record out, and we had done it with, a producer named Jesse Shatkin, who is amazing. He also, somebody who I really, just making a record with him, I got to sit there and watch his process, and I learned a lot just sitting there, hours every week. And I'm really thankful for that. But the product that we got out of it, like it felt like, Milo Greene was 4 lead singers, 4 songwriters put into one band. And when that was when we were connected, that was a really special thing. But then when that's out of sync, you've got just way too many people trying to, and the name of the second record is Control. So, that's a reflection of what we were going through. You had too many people trying to take control. But people who weren't leaders and who didn't know how to include everybody, cause that's really important to like make any business a functioning machine. Like there's got to be some sense of leadership to make everyone feel involved and included and excited. But it was just kind of all of us. And what happened is you felt this record that ended up, it feels like every nook and cranny is kind of filled with something, and nothing's really listening to each other. From an arrangement standpoint. That's my own experience with it. And so we went on the road, we toured that. I didn't really enjoy the songs, so it was kind of weird to, like, all of a sudden I felt like I was touring and not really enjoying playing the music. And like I said, the relationships were starting to fall apart. And somewhere during that time, I started to write with people like I was saying, Gabe and Conrad out in Nashville. And there's a project, this girl named Maddie Sipes, who's from my hometown of Placerville, that I've been developing, for the last like 5 or 6 years. And, I started doing producing and like started falling in love with, making records with people again. And so I kind of had this, I had this moment where I was realizing I don't like the thing that's taking up the majority of my time in life. I'm not enjoying. Like I am not in love with it. And here are all these pieces, you know, these kind of like side pieces that are my passion.
Sure.
So I went to the band and I just said, hey, I don't know how to, from really just being honest about where my heart is in a bunch of like these other projects. And this was at a time like I was bringing in songs that would later become songs for my solo project, The Guest and the Host. And like I would get like no feedback or like it wouldn't spark anything in my bandmates, and then I would take these songs to other people and they'd be like, oh, this is great. And then we would figure out and they become songs I love. And so like, once that collaboration wasn't there, I'm like, why are we doing this? Why are we even in a band together if I'm bringing you songs and there isn't that spark, but I'm getting that spark from all these other co-writers, Sure. So that was the thing. Like I said, I went to the band. I said, hey, this is where my heart is. This is what I want to be doing more of. They said, well, if that's the case, you should probably go do that full time because we want people who are committed to this full time.
Right.
And I thought that was, that's fair, and so yeah, about end of 2015, I decided to take the plunge and figure out what it looked like to become a professional songwriter, a producer.
What I've always loved and respected about great writers and artists is their unflinching pursuit of what feels true and pure to them. The constant digging toward a core emotion or feeling that rests just below the surface. When something begins to feel fake or too processed, great writers seem to possess a sonar of sorts that helps them forge a new direction. When you listen to Andrew speak and you listen to his music and hear the depth of sound in his production, it's not too difficult to see that he's an artist constantly at work, attempting to uncover the rawest emotions and sentiments that music can offer. Reminds me of a Seamus Heaney poem called Digging, where it reads, an edited version like this. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father, digging, I look down, till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. By God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. Yeah, and that's, it's just such an interesting story, you kind of outlining the sort of beginning stages, the rise, and then sort of you stepping away, but it seems like you've taken from it quite a bit personally as far as learning about yourself, like who you are,
Absolutely.
Your skill set, what you love to do. And,
Yeah.
Ultimately it's kind of set you on this new path that seems pretty cool to get out of it.
I am really, really thankful for not only the Milo Greene experience, but having collaborated with those people at that time, because I was a trained musician growing up, and my main collaborators in the project were Marlena and Robbie, and they were not trained musicians, but they were brilliant musical minds, and they really knew what a good song felt like.
Mm-hmm.
And they would push me in ways that really opened up how I thought about music and how I thought about creating music, and much more fluid, much more seamless. Was where they were pushing me with the process. And so so for that, I'm forever indebted to having gone through that. It's actually kind of led me to some stuff I'm doing now, where I've developed some recording sessions with I went to school for theater. One of my best friends is a theater director, and he and I together have developed some recording sessions that are specifically for really anyone, like non-musicians I'm most excited about. We call it The Guest and the Host Make Music, and our tagline is, it's a recording experience that literally anyone can be a part of. And so like I said, with some of the Milo Greene people, I was able to make music with people who weren't technically musicians, but I realized, like, if I could find a sense of play with anybody,
mm-hmm.
then I knew how to, like, and if I could get someone to just tell me, like, what they were excited about, like, oh, I love that sound. Oh, I love, oh, I don't like that drum. What is that drum? Let's take that out. Like right. That kind of stuff, like finding those type of people who, and figuring out how to bring that out of people, because different personalities have different ways of verbalizing those things, So yeah, for me, going back for 1 second, like with the Milo Greene project, mm-hmm. I was able to kind of get a confidence in my skills, and then it allowed me to, especially from a production standpoint, feel confident to make the jump into what I'm doing now.
And you mentioned an element of play, and I know just, from us being Facebook friends, you have a quote that you recently posted about from Joseph Campbell: what you have to do, you do with play. And I went to your website as well, and it seems like a really interesting format where someone comes up and does the make music thing, where you spend a whole day with them writing and producing the song, and that seems like an element of music that's at the core of making music, is what's most fun about it.
Oh yeah. And we forget that, like what happened with the Milo Greene project was the second record. The first record, it was all about let's just get together and play. Let's just make shit that we love. Yeah. And then the second record all of a sudden had this like worry of, oh, will we be cool enough? And will this music be, received as well as we like it? And, like there were all these questions about, like, it was all this like future anxiety attached to it, instead of just being present with, like, we're in a studio and we're together and let's make cool shit, and then we'll deal with all of those aspects down the line. Like, what, like that, all that stuff will fall into place. Like, the only thing that matters is getting in the same room and creating and having fun. Cause I'm a strong believer that, when you can, like, find a connection, when you can love the people you're around and create something where there's an intense amount of joy in the room, like that room gets, the joy in that room gets pulled into the microphone somehow, and people feel it. And it's just like the vibrations of the recording actually get infused with that joy, and people, and the listener knows it somehow.
Yeah. No, wow. It's a really great way to put it. And it's like that it factor you talked about. Like, sometimes you just hear a record or you hear a song and it just comes right through, and it hits you in ways that other ones that maybe, sound great or produced really great, but just doesn't have that thing that, wow. A lot of good stuff. My mind's kind of like going, but I want to ask you one more. Sort of during the Milo Greene era, you got involved with doing vocals for the last Damien Rice record. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about that because that's, to me, that's pretty cool.
It was wild, man. It was a dream come true. I spent a lot of time in college with Damien's first record, O. And so, we got a call one night. Again, this was our manager, our management company. He was on the same management company, and our manager called me one night and just said, "Hey, what are you doing tonight?" It's like, nothing. Why? He says, "Do you want to go meet up with Damien Rice at the studio up in the valley?" And I was like, "Holy hell, yes!" So I like dropped. I think I was actually supposed to do something, and I just dropped whatever I was doing and went up there, and it was just just had like a jam session, me and a couple of the other Milos, and he said, "All right, cool. I'm gonna be starting the record tomorrow. Why don't you guys join me? And we'll be out in Malibu, and we'll make it happen." And I was like, just my head was spinning. Like I had the biggest grin on my face, and we come to find out that the place out in Malibu was Rick Rubin's spot. And he's, from a music producer standpoint, I'm not sure I would say he's probably at the top of legends,
Yeah.
There's a couple other in that sphere, but like he was, Time Magazine 100 most influential people, a couple years back. So yeah, he's a legend, and he's like in his house, or the studio out there is where like Dylan was out in the 60s and 70s, and the band was recording some some of their big records, and just a ton of history. And so yeah, just the whole thing. The day before, I had no idea what any of this would happen, and then here I am, in the room, and it was the recording process was just all of us set up in this room and just recording together. There's a drummer in an ISO booth, but everybody else was in the same room. Wow. There's like David Rollins was playing guitar on the sessions. Wow. And one of the dudes, the violin player from the Punch Brothers, was there. And it's just like, my mind was just, my head was spinning, totally spinning. So we ended up doing a couple days out there, and then Damien brought us back to work on a couple other songs that he did for a movie at one point. And so we saw him a bunch through a couple years there. I made a point to send him an email after those sessions, and just kind of just try to express my gratitude for, having that experience and being a part of that experience, because it was mind blowing for me to go from, being a young kid I remember taking the bus to, in college, sitting there with my headphones on, listening to Damien Rice. And then all of a sudden I'm, 10 years later, I'm sitting there in the same room with him, watching him sing next to me,
Yeah. Well, I mean, and just, I guess, what was he like in the studio? I mean, or just around? Is he kind of I would imagine kind of a quiet guy, or is he different than you would think in person?
I guess there's a little quietness. I feel like he really fits the artist stereotype.
Okay.
Very just passionate about what he's doing. And I remember like we'd sit there and play through songs together, like rehearsing them. And he was just like always giving 100%. I remember that feeling of like feeling like I was getting this front row concert from him every time we would sit there and play together. Wow. That's great.
Yeah. When we decided to do this, and I was digging through your stuff, and, I listened to that record a bunch, and for whatever reason, I didn't read the album credits, and then, seeing you guys on there, that's really cool. So, I want to now sort of transfer into what you're doing now. And I want to start by, going back a little bit. You and I first met out on the road in the little town of Redding, California, up north. And at that time, you were just playing as yourself, and I think you had your band, or you're playing with your band. And you have I don't know if I've ever told you this, but you have a song on one of your records that I've always really liked, because I think we might have exchanged albums or something. Okay. But your song Broadway.
Okay.
I always really like that song. I don't know. I don't know if you ever think about it or play that song anymore. But it was just, that whole record I thought was really good. I remember listening to it up and down.
Thanks, dude.
But getting, I guess, to my question, because now you go under the moniker, the guest and the host. And do you find that it's different, better or worse or whatnot, writing songs under a moniker as opposed to, earlier in your career writing it, as yourself?
Yeah, there's a bit of freedom there. Like you take it and so the whole, and I actually, that concept that you're hitting on there is part of the idea behind my moniker, the guest and the host. It's an intentional, separation. And so I guess I need to back up a little bit and explain that a little more. But like when I left Milo Greene, the thing that was really difficult was I'd spent like 5 years saying I am in Milo Greene and I am, like it was my life. And so when I walked away from that, I was really like, from an ego standpoint, I didn't know who I was. Like because there hadn't been that separation, because my entire life had been that band. I kind of, went through this ego journey that I had to detach. And so, I spent a number of years, I really, there was a couple of years there where I did a lot of reading, and, you brought up Joseph Campbell earlier. Like Joseph Campbell was a huge guide for me during that period. As well as I found, a guy here in LA, and it's so LA, but he was like the typical like LA guru dude. His name was George Falcon. And he became like, he was a spiritual teacher. I think Joseph Campbell opened a lot of doors to me, and then about what spirituality and religion could look like. I never grew up with any of that. But I started to develop my own relationship with spirituality and religion thanks to Joseph Campbell. And then when George came into my life, he was the kind of the guru who showed up and helped me, like really, gave me that person who I could ask questions to, and so, and we would have all sorts of talks, and it went way beyond spirituality too. Like we'd talk about life and dating and just how to, I was actually listening to one of his one of our sessions this morning. And he was talking to me about, men and women and the relationship and how there's a yin and yang, and there has to, energetically, there has to be a balance of the yin and yang in each person in that, relationship. And you'd go from stuff like that to, financial advice. I actually think a lot of what I'm doing now is based off of a lot of conversations he and I had together, where I was telling him I haven't never really had a financial education. Tell me, can you point me in some directions? And so he started, pushing me towards, the idea of passive income. And I see, and he was talking about real estate, but while I didn't really have the money for real estate, I did see a connect between music, like royalties in music and being a passive income source. So anyway, that was a long-winded thing about George. But he had this idea, from a spirituality standpoint. And I'm sure he got it from somebody else, but, he talked about the guest and the host and the separation that is, awareness versus what you're aware of. Okay. So it's like this idea. We can go through this right now. Think about your foot right now, Dan. Okay. All right. So there's your foot. So you are currently aware of your foot. Yes? Yes. Okay. So you've never mistakenly thought you were your foot, right? No, I haven't. So just because you're aware of your foot doesn't mean you are your foot, right? Right. Okay. So let's just take this into another realm. Let's go to the feeling of sadness. Have you felt sad recently? Sure. And did you think that you were that emotion? No. Did it become, I guess where I'm going there is, we can get blinders on when it comes to Like I was saying about Milo Greene, like I believed I was Milo Greene, like I was a part of Milo Greene, and when I stepped out of that,
right,
I wasn't sure, and who I was and what I was, I had what I was aware of. I was aware of being in Milo Greene, but I had made that my identity instead of my identity just being rooted in the awareness of being in Milo Greene, So the guest is the awareness. The host is that vessel, the avatar that is what you're aware of.
Wow. That's a very well thought out and deep answer to a name. I feel like a lot of band names just that's the name of the street I lived on, or and that's
yeah.
That's really cool. And so
going back to your question, it's exactly it's a moniker that within the moniker it is allowing for that separation that. It's not me. It's just a vessel for my creativity.
Okay. I'm still aware of my right foot right now, by the way, after that. I'm still thinking about it. And that's a great, I guess the moniker thing, I've thought a lot about that myself, and, all my records come out under my name, and there's times where I've thought, man, it'd be nice to, try something different or whatnot, but not have it be necessarily attached to my name. And so that's the reason I ask you that, just because you doing it from both sides now, it seems like this is a better way for you going forward, at least right now.
Yeah. It's been nice. It's been really nice to have a moniker to just kind of put things out under.
Are there any other types of art that inspire you in the songwriting process besides music? And I guess to follow that up, like I'm a big time reader, so I just find written novels, or sometimes I'll see just a fantastically done movie, and I'm like, wow, that's the way they put that story together, or whatever. So wonder if there's anything that surrounds your songwriting.
Man, this is, I feel like this is kind of a lazy answer, but I don't know. I guess I feel like I'm just pulling inspiration from everywhere in life.
That's a good answer too.
I think that, it's not just art. It's the conversations I have with people.
Sure.
It's the drives down the street. It's, absolutely, like you're talking about film, there's always been kind of a love affair between film and a cross inspiration of film and music. But yeah, I think, I'm in the school of life here.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to find moments to be inspired everywhere I look.
Has your songwriting process changed as you've gotten, older, more mature in your career from when you were, say early 20s?
Yeah. I think, I write in so many different ways now that I think, for me, the creative process, I think the thing I'm focusing on most, and I know you asked about writing specifically, but I'm just going to kind of lift it up to just a blanket creative process.
Sure.
I think for a lot of the work I do is collaborative. And so, whether it's for my project, whether it's for someone else's project, you get in the room, and I think this is where that idea of play comes in, where you get to see, how does this person like to play? How does this person like to be inspired? How does what kind of music does this person like? And for me, like, that's part of the game is that back and forth, is that like little tennis match that you're having with somebody.
Yeah.
And I think threes, I really enjoy working with a group of 3 people, 3 people total. And the reason for that is it has this perfect balance, in my opinion, where you have the lowest common denominator with a majority.
Okay, right.
The lowest common denominator with a majority, meaning that if 2 people like something that's going on, and everybody trusts each other, then you just say, you know what? Let's run with that. And because you never hit that wall of like, well, there's 2 people that, if you're just writing with one person, you never hit that wall of like, well, I like this and you like that. So, we're at you kind of hit this impasse. There's something about threes that was really fluid to me in a process where, we could walk into, I like, it's in the last year, I've gotten to the point where we can walk into a room that morning, walk into the studio, and 4 or 5 hours later, we have a fully recorded and written song, almost pretty much done. If the right people are in the room.
That's really cool.
It's just like kind of embracing the channel of it. Like, I think another thing, to go back to your question, like I've really tried to get out of my own way when it comes to being creative. I think for a lot of my life, a lot of my early life, I thought the music came from me. And I at this point, I feel like it comes through me. And I think there was like a heaviness, that the idea that it came from me created that got in my own way. And now, like, I just kind of let whatever inspires me or grabs me or just comes into my mind in that moment. I just trust it and run with it. And like I said, it's like the process. A lot of the records I'm doing, people come in, we write the song that day, we record the song that day, and maybe we need another day on it. Maybe two, but for the most part, like within a day or two, I'm doing most songs here. And I don't think this lifestyle would work any other way. Just kind of based on how, just how I have everything set up. If you're spending a week on one song, if you're spending a month on one song, the reason I say it is because it's a numbers game. If I go back to what I was talking about with passive income, from a passive income's perspective, I need to be able to crank out quality songs with, I want to put time into it, but if I can put a day or two into it and then it's out in the world and making money in some way, then that helps me build this kind of collective of songs, all sending me 3 cents every month,
Right. But the Music Modernization Act just passed. So, you got hopefully a little bit better now.
There's some help on the way. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that's specifically for songwriters. It's kind of music is kind of music, and the monetization of it is a little confusing in that you have two parties for each, for a recording of a song. You actually have people getting paid for the recording and then people getting paid for the intellectual property.
Right.
So that's why you had a record label and you have a publisher, and the publisher owns the song itself, And so what's happened with Spotify is that, and Apple Music is, somehow the labels got in there first and negotiated, and what the streaming services are paying the recording of the song is 10 times more than what they're paying the writers of the song. And so what this Modernization Act does is it takes laws that were built in, came through in 1907, I think, or I mean, they're definitely pre-World War I, and kind of helps bring the people who are just on the side of writing the song some more fair wages, because what it is currently is it's the equivalent of the government coming in and saying, taking a song and saying, this is what your song is worth. Could you imagine them going to a car company and saying, all right, we're taking your car and this is what your car is worth. It's literally, it's not been,
right.
From an economic standpoint, an open market for songwriters.
Yeah, I know it's exciting news for songwriters to feel like getting a better seat at the table, at least going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's one of the best investments that you've ever made in your career? And that could be taken any way you want it.
I think the best investment I have made is believing in myself and believing in my passion for music and just diving in. Because there were so many times in my life where I was like, I don't know, I'm going to pay rent in 2 months, but you get to wake up every day saying, I'm living exactly the life I want to be living.
And that's obviously something that's more difficult at certain times than not. I know, like you mentioned, moving around a lot or paying rent.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't have any kids at this point. I'm not married. Like I've been able to dive into this head first because, it's, you know, like I have a relationship with music. You know, I make musical babies every day.
Right.
So I've got all these little offspring out there doing collecting their 3 cents, you know?
Yeah. Well, you've been to this point very successful, and I know just, you know, how you are and how you work with people and what you're doing. I mean, it's just going to continue. So that's a good investment you made there. My last question for you is any book that you can think of that you would, you know, give as a gift to someone that you really like.
Going back to, you brought up the Joseph Campbell quote that I posted, when I was traveling around in Milo Greene, and I was in a spot in life where I was out on the road and all these, you know, like dreams were literally coming true. I was doing exactly what I had wanted to do for a long time, but I found myself not happy, not, enjoying, you know, in love with life. And so, I found a book through my best friend, Spencer, who, it's Joseph Campbell, and it's called the Joseph Campbell Companion. And I think it's called, the subtitle is, Reflections in Life and Art. That book, like I said earlier, it started, kind of a self-spiritual journey, that I had never, you know, I'd never really come up with much religion around or spirituality around. So that, and that one in particular, it dives into so many different topics, about just living well, and his reflections on living well. And he's just a brilliant, brilliant man. So that like really changed, the way I think in a lot of ways. And I'm really thankful to Spencer for putting it in front of me. And I have literally bought 15 copies of that book already. I've given it to strangers on airplanes. I've given it to all of my best friends. You know, anyone who knows me has a copy of that book. My mom, my girlfriend just stole my copy, so I guess I got to get another. But yeah, Joseph Campbell Companion.
I'm definitely gonna have to pick up a copy somewhere because you've sold me on it for sure.
It's a good one.
Well, hey, this has been just a fascinating interview, and I appreciate just your insights and candor on so many topics, that are near and dear to me. And I know it's just going to be a great listen for people of the podcast. So before we leave, I just want to say thank you again. And then, I'm going to leave you with the last word. So anything else you'd like to add?
Stay present and play. That was the kind of a piece of that post I had written today. But I think you find joy in life in the present moment, and finding joy and love here and now is what life is about.
Thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Beautiful Word Podcast featuring Andrew Heringer. To find out more about Andrew's music and studios, visit theguestandthehost.com. Thanks Jack Carlino for providing the artwork for the podcast. The songs Lila and Words are used throughout the podcast, and those are original songs that will come out on my new record Grandeur in January. To find out more about the podcast and music and upcoming shows, visit dankrikorian.com. And as always, we appreciate you guys stopping by. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are, keep making that beautiful work. See you next time.